everyone, this is PK Entertainment and we're back again, and here now we have another video for you, and this will be my spoiler review for the Suicide Squad 2021. Now you can catch out my non-spoiler review of the film, and I will leave the link in the description as well. And just to give an overall quick abridged version of my overall thoughts, I felt that whilst there was lots of eye-popping visuals, and then there was certainly amount of gusto and energy and vibe that James Gunn delivered in this movie, it sadly ended up being very chaotic and messy and very disjointed throughout the rest of the film. So I kind of had a very indifferent feel to the film overall, and that may be opposed to what a lot of people may think about the film. And I stated previously, if you basically like the likes of Deadpool and Kick-Ass, if you like that overall tone, that juvenile, more R-rated tone and humour, then I feel that you would like this film. But if you are opposed to that style of filmmaking, then I don't think you'll be a very much of a fan of this film, and it may even turn you off in some places overall. So those are my quick non-spoilerific details, and you can check out more on the previous video that I mentioned before. But in this video here, we're going to have much more of a freer discussion. I'm not going to go over necessarily the order of the film. I'm just going to outpick some of the elements that I thought worked and some of the elements that I didn't feel worked as well throughout this film overall. So again, this is your final warning that this is indeed now spoiler time, going into spoilers throughout the film. So if you haven't watched the film yet, you probably want to turn off now, go away to HBO Max or cinemas, because the film is available on all formats now. Watch the film and then come back to this overall review. So the first element I want to pick out is probably the opening 10 to 15 minutes, when we really see at the beginning scene Michael Rooker's character. And I feel it's a shame that he really wasn't in the film very much, because I think is quite a substantial actor. As we all know, he had a prominent role in both of James Gunn's Guardians of the Galaxy films, but he was only in his film for the first 10 to 15 minutes, and I think that was a shame. And we see that opening scene where he takes out the bird or the yellow pigeon, and I think that was really James Gunn really setting the tone for what he wanted to set out for the rest of this film. And then we get in the classic style, I think, of earlier films, particularly Predator. When I'm looking at here, that classic case of when we introduce all the characters at the same time, when they're on a hangar plane, and we see the looks of Margot Robbie coming in and Joey Kinnaman character coming in as Rick Flag. And this is the chance really to get us to know the characters, what they're about, where they're coming from. And I don't think the film really did an overall good job of that. You know, I wasn't really interested in any of the newer characters, and we didn't get much background information as to what happened in particular with Harley Quinn or Rick Flag. And I think James Gunn really didn't want to take too much time overall. He wanted to kick into high gear straight away, and he could worry about the characterization later on throughout the film. And he certainly had that intent in the first opening action sequence when they're set on a mission and they all have to jump underwater, and we see that the Weasel character dies because it can't swim, and Michael Rooker has to save him, swimming by from him, and we can see he's already getting nervous about the incoming danger of the mission. And then we get another character, and I think his name was Blackyard. Again, wasn't very interested, but he gets killed straight away when it seems like he's the mole within the team, and he's trying to basically out the other people that he's been working with. And we see that shot when he's standing in the open forest and all the lights light up, and straight away you know he's going to die, and then he gets brutally shot in the face. You see his face blown off, and again, that was a real sign of intention that James Gunn really wasn't messing around in terms of the overall film's graphic nature, in terms of its violence. And he at this stage was just taking out all of these characters. There was another character, I can't remember her name, I think she was dressed in orange. She reminded me a lot of a Mortal Kombat character. It might have been Shiva from Mortal Kombat 3, if I'm getting that right. Again, correct me in the comments. But she dies as well. She jumps on the helicopter and she's trying to fight off various soldiers, and then the helicopter explodes. And the other character, I think his name was TDK, and he had this distinctive skill of being able to disattach his arms and fight people with his arms. He was able to control them. I think we saw that in the earlier trailers for this movie, and that was quite a cool, inventive sequence. But then later on, his arms are all blown up, and then he gets killed. And I think the shocking moment is that when we saw Captain Boomerang, if you remember, was played by Joe Courtney, and he gets killed when we see his face get impaled by spikes, and then he smiles as the helicopter comes in and crashes him out. Now, some people may think this is weird because obviously he was heavily involved in the promotion of this film, and his face is on the promotional material and the posters, and he did all the interviews in terms of the marketing of this film. But I think they did that obviously because they didn't want to spoil his death. Like, I think James Gunn was really going for a shock, balls out intention, And I think if Jai Courtney wasn't featured very much in the promotional material, then people would have cottoned on that he probably died in the first 5 to 10 minutes. So I think that's why. But I think it was a shame, because I think Jai Courtney had some presence as Captain Boomerang. I think he was one of the more likeable characters in the first film, and I think he had the potential to be expanded upon in this film. So that was a bit of a shame that he couldn't really last the first opening minutes. But definitely, you're like, what? You've seen all these big characters getting taken out in the first opening scenes overall. But we move on forward, and then we get that scene between Deadshot and his daughter, and we learn that she's been in trouble because she tried to steal the TV, I think it was, and they're having a back and forth. And then this is when we get a lot of the profanity, we're getting a lot of the F-bombs between the two. It's quite an intense scene overall, and this is really the only, I think, emotional investment that we had in Bloodsport character, I think. But I liked Idris Elba. I thought he was very good in the role. And the next standout scene was when they have to infiltrate this camp because Rick Flag has been separated from the group, and they find out that he's still alive. And this is when we get, I think, elements of the banter between Deadshot and Peacemaker, and we see them, they're taking out all of these hostages in brutal fashion, both men and females. So again, James Gunn really didn't care at this point in terms of the overall violence, and they're taking out all of these soldiers in the best way possible. We see them shooting behind their head, and there's that gruesome scene when Peacemaker shoots somebody with an explosive cartridge, so he does nothing to begin with, and then the guy explodes. Really gruesome as well, and they're trying to one-up each other. And yeah, there was decent chemistry between the two characters. And then we get the revelation that actually the group that captured Rick Flag was part of a resistance group, and they were trying to overturn the corrupt rule in terms of the Courtois Maltese. And when we see them here discovered, this is when I think they were trying to inject a lot more of a comedic side to Rick Flag, because he's really much of an indifferent personality in the first film, and I think they wanted to give Joel Kinnaman a bit more material to play with, but sadly I don't think he could deliver it. And again, I wasn't really interested in Rick Flag as a character, and to be honest, I wasn't really interested in this whole resistance group, and they were trying to overthrow their government. They keep referring back to that throughout the film, to be fair, so at least they were trying to be consistent, but that was one of the least interesting elements in terms of the overall story. We then catch up with Peter Capaldi as the Thinker, and we get the first look at the Project Starfish and the experimentation within these underground laboratories. This is essentially the introduction to Starro, and we learn that it does absorb humans to make it part of its organism. So this is a couple of shots where I thought the CGI works quite well. I did like a couple of these early visual shots that we see, footage of people getting absorbed by Starro. And this is very eerie at the time, and I think Peter Capaldi is a great actor. He's a very extroverted character, but the Thinker was really a waste of a character. They could have taken him out and put anybody in. He really wasn't that important to the overall story. You could have just had them, we have to get Project Starfish, we don't necessarily need the Thinker. They could have just gone to the location, discovered where everything was, and then looked to take Starro out. And then we get one of, I think, the biggest issues centering around Harley Quinn. And I mentioned in my non-spoiler review, there were one of two scenes that really seemed to take a detour in terms of the overall plot, and I think sucked a lot of the energy and the momentum that it was building at the time. And we get the first scene where essentially she's captured and then she's courted because they want her to basically infiltrate and take out one of the corrupt politicians. And then we get this really in-the-gutted scene where we see them talking to each other. There's this long conversation, and then they have sex, and then Harley takes him out, and then we get more commentary about how she always falls for the wrong men, and that now she's learned from her previous encounters, when she comes across a man, anytime she gets a sense of a bad sign or a red alert, I think that's what she says, then she has to take him out. Now, you probably knew she was going to take this guy out, because we all know Harley's not going to be involved in any other relationship. We all know the only connection that she has is to the Joker. And I just felt this was really not necessary. Why did we need to take such a long time to this? And this was one of the biggest examples of when they were really pandering to Harley Quinn as a character. We understand, yes, it's Margot Robbie, she's an established actress, and yes, in terms of the DCEU, Harley Quinn is really one of the most established characters, because this is really the third film that she's been in, coming off, of course, The Suicide Squad and also Birds of Prey. So I think they really wanted to make sure that Harley Quinn was a stand-up. We all know she's very popular, and I think also the fact they wanted another big female presence throughout the film to go alongside Ratcatcher. But again, this just took away a lot. You know, I'd rather we'd stay true to the mission. And then we go to the second scene when essentially she sees she's captured and she's been interrogated. She makes that joke about 69. Again, just very much fit in with the overall tone of the film. And this was a flaw in the film because they take this detour where they're on a mission, but Harley's in trouble. But for some reason, we have to save Harley. I don't understand. They barely established any real close connection in the early part of the film. As I stated, that was a big flaw. So again, you're wondering, why do they need to save Harley? It's not established that she's got any particular skill set or necessary role in terms of what they're trying to do. Right? So why do they need to save Harley? So they take this big detour and then we see her getting captured. And again, they make this whole operation to save her, but Harley's more than competent in saving herself. And we see her disengage herself from the soldier and she kills him. She snaps his neck. She gets the key and she goes away. And I mentioned in my non-spoiler review how if Harley Quinn wasn't a Mary Sue, then they really did a lot to elevate herself in terms of her overall abilities and her competency level. And we see here she's just taken out all of these goons on her own, and all of a sudden she's a very expert, skilled fighter. Where did that come from? She's able to handle all of the guns, and she's got equally as sharp marksmanship. Where did that come from? And it's just too much pandering. And I don't mind Harley Quinn having stand-up moments, but again, this felt a scene that was really much more in keeping with the Birds of Prey movie rather than the Suicide Squad movie overall. And I just feel Harley Quinn is not a lead character that can stand on her own. And I think that was proven by the Birds of Prey film as well. She works better as a integral supporting character when essentially everybody's trying to get on about with the mission and Harley Quinn's doing all these crazy things. She's providing a lot of the comic relief, a lot of the humour, and that was really best exhibited in the animated film Batman Assault on Arkham. If you look at that film overall, as I stated before, Harley is very much more of a supporting character and she's causing a lot of mayhem, sometimes to the detriment of the team, and I think that's what makes her such a valuable character. But having her in these standout scenes, I mean, it was a very well executed scene, very well choreographed. Margot Robbie looks great, as she always does in every film, and in particular as Harley Quinn, and we get those slow motion shots where she's taking out all the guards. Again, like Peacemaker, she's chopping off limbs and slitting throats and she's shooting everybody. And for some reason, James Gunn had to really overload it by having all of these flowers start appearing. We had all these blue, pink and yellow flowers appearing, all of these slow motion shots as Harley's taking everybody on. She's got screaming and she's taking everybody out. You know, and James Gunn is very indulgent like Zack Snyder, and I think this is one instance where he got too caught up in itself. You didn't need this sequence, or at the very least, you could have made it a far more tense and visceral sequence. And that was in keeping with Birds of Prey. Maybe he was instructed because they want to, consider before, make Harley a prominent character and have some sort of continuity within the DCU. So maybe that's why as well he included that sequence, but wasn't necessary, and I think it hurt the film in terms of derailing the pace overall. And then they joke at the end, doesn't they, because they're all trying to infiltrate the building and Harley Quinn is standing outside and she mentions before that she could go back in and they could save him. Again, that's already something that we saw from the trailer, but I think that wasted a lot of time that we could have spent on the other characters. That's why it felt that it wasn't needed overall. The next distinctive scene was a Polka Dot, and he was a decent character overall. We did get a hint of his backstory when he remarks on the fact that he was experimented by his mother and also his brothers and sisters were experimented on as well. And this is when I thought they were going to go to a particularly dark place, and knowing James Gunn character, I thought maybe we were going to go down that dark road of maybe child molestation and experimentation, but we didn't really concentrate on that. We had that vivid scene where we see Polka Dot and you see his face all distorted. Yeah, and that was a bit graphic, and overall he has to keep all of the polka dots in check, otherwise I think he will lose himself or get destroyed or self-destruct. And they had this running joke where essentially he sees his mother all the time, so he sees his mother in the visuals of everybody else. Again, that didn't land for me, wasn't very funny. See that towards the end of the film when he's taking on Starro and he sees Starro as this giant domesticated mum. Again, I didn't really get the joke. Maybe some people feel that was very funny. I didn't really find it particularly humorous in any sense or shape or form. So I think that was a wasted character. They had potential here to give him a bit more emotional weight that they also tried to do with Ratcatcher, who I stated before was probably the most developed character in terms of her own backstory. We have that scene when she's talking about her, I think it's her brother or her dad, and how they came across rats and they protected her, and essentially that's how she got control of them. Again, this is all done in a kind of rear view mirror. Why not just have the sequence play out? And again, this is very much typical of James Gunn, very similar to Zack Snyder, that he's very visual orientated. He can't just have a scene play out at face value. There's always got to have some sort of visual shots or aesthetic playing behind it, so it takes a lot of the emotional sting and impact away from the film. The next aspect I want to pick up was the nightclub scene where we see them all together as they're infiltrating the base, and I think this was another attempt to establish some sort of banter and bond and camaraderie between the team members, but I think it failed in this fight. And actually, I think this was one of the elements where it was actually inferior to the first movie, because if you remember, in that film we have that scene when they again go to the bar, but I think it's empty or it's broken down, and then we get a lot more deeper conversations between Will Smith's character, and also Harley Quinn, and also Diablo, and we get the Diablo backstory, and that's a prime example where I think the first film did it better than the second film, because in the first film we get the backstory of Diablo played more out when it's involving his girlfriend. I think he kills his girlfriend where he exhibits his powers, so that had a lot more of a tragic edge towards it rather than the backstories for Ratcatcher or Polka Dot Man. And I think this scene could have been more prolonged, but again, any semblance where we see them, they're drinking shots and having a bit of a laugh, that should have been prolonged. So I would have quite happily condensed the Harley Quinn sequences or taken one of the scenes out, and we focus much more on the team dynamic here, because I felt that was a lot more important in really making you care more about the characters. And another element, and this isn't really an effect on the film, but due to its overall cartoony feel, we had to get these constant title cards. So we had the end credit scene, and then we have Operation Fulheim, and this is when we save Harley. Is that really important? No, but again, it doesn't feel necessary, and again, just makes it much more of a cartoony feel about the film. Now, another aspect that I commented on in my non-spoiler review was the role of Amanda Waller. Now, I mentioned before that in the first film, I thought she was one of the best characters throughout the film. She really showcased that typical Amanda Waller that I know, and I think a lot of people know, primarily from the Justice League Unlimited show, where she's that really hard, tough, cynical, no nonsense, very ruthless type of character. She'll take anyone at an instant if she considers them a loose end, and I thought Viola Davis played that brilliantly. But here she was really played much more of a joke. For the most part, she's overseeing the other staff within the office who are really jokers for the most part. We see them, they're having various bets on who's going to last longer in terms of the team. And I think in the first film, Amanda Waller would have sharpened onto that, and she would have really had a go at them and taken them out for that, you know, or criticised them overall. And if you remember in that first film, when it's found out that they have to really kind of downsize the operations, and she goes in and she takes out all of the office staff because she's considered them loose end. That's Amanda Waller. But here, for the most part, she seemed to just tolerate more a lot of their shenanigans and their silliness overall. And we have that scene when essentially Starro breaks out and he's destroying the city, and she tells the heroes to turn away because they've accomplished their mission of taking the data that shows the Project Starfish, and they're walking away. And then they obviously decide, because we've got to show these characters in a heroic light, right? We can't have them walking away as Starro is taking out all of the innocents within the city. And then as they're walking away, Amanda Waller's trying to call them back, and they're resisting her, so she goes to detonate them, and then she gets struck over the head by one of the admin staff. So that's when leads to the heroes taking out Starro. And then later on, we see Amanda Waller and Deadshot has brokered a deal, basically stating that if she tries to attack them or their loved ones, he'll release the footage of Project Starfish. And Amanda Waller knows that one of the admin team took them out. Now, again, Amanda Waller of old would have taken them all out, but she kind of just sits there and she's in the window and she sees them all laughing, and that's not Amanda Waller. And it just felt out of character. Now, another character as well, I think Rick Flag, again, he wasn't very interesting in the first film, and it wasn't very interesting here. Now, his best scene was probably in his fight against Peacemaker. Essentially, they're fighting over the data that they've managed to extract. Now, Rick Flag wants to expose this because he thinks the country has a right to know what was going on in terms of the government, how they were essentially working with the South American government in order to experiment the Project Starfish. Now, obviously, the mission was to not have that data come out. So this was a decent fight scene between the two, but it was a bit anticlimactic because we all know that basically they've got future plans for the Peacemaker character, that he's going to have his own series, I believe, on HBO Max. So you knew he wasn't going to lose this fight, but I didn't think they were going to kill Rick Flag. I thought they were going to keep him alive because he's one of the established characters. So that was a bit of a shocking revelation. And then for some reason, James Gunn decides to have this shot when Peacemaker stabs him in the chest. we see the window shaft go right into his heart, and his heart's beating again. Why was that necessary? It didn't really add anything. It didn't add any more impact to the moment overall. Maybe I'm nitpicking, but why have that shot overall? Just add a more graphic nature to the violence. And then Rick Flag dies, and that's it. So no more Rick Flag. And many people I've seen reviewing this movie have alluded to the fact that they did that because they basically wanted Peacemaker to be the de facto replacement for Rick Flag. So bit of a shame if you're a fan of that character, but I wasn't overall that concerned about. And another tense situation was between the fight between Deadshot and Peacemaker. Now, I had a problem with this because this is when the film started to lose itself, because we've got the revelation of Starro and he's starting to break out, and we have that tower scene where they're all trapped and Starro is breaking down the building. And this was another time jump where we jumped to 8 minutes before, where essentially Peacemaker kills Rick Flag, and then he's going to kill Ratcatcher, who was taking out the data, and obviously no loose ends. And then we jumped to 8 minutes back. Why did we jump 8 minutes back? Just let the scene play out, which was quite a tense scene, and it was quite a gripping scene overall, and I think it was probably the best moment of Peacemaker. But for some reason James Gunn decided we had to go 8 minutes back, and we really get this unnecessary scene where we see King Shark and he's looking at all these fish in a fish tank. Add nothing, absolutely held nothing for the character, gave us no depth, no backstory to him overall. So again, why was that necessary? And then we get this action sequence where the tower is being broken down by the guards. They're all trapped, and we see them running over as the tower is exploding. And then we really get this stupid scene, even for this movie, where basically Deadshot is falling through the floors, and he must fall about 5 different floors, but somehow he manages to maintain his stance, he manages to maintain his balance. Now, realistically, of course, his legs would have split out with joints. He would have pulled all of his hamstrings and ligaments, but he somehow manages to keep his poise. And I just wanted a tense shootout between both him and Peacemaker. And they get this scene where they shoot bullets, and Deadshot's bullet is smaller, but it pierces through Peacemaker's bullets and essentially shoots him in the throat. Now, of course, we knew Peacemaker was still going to come alive, and we saw that again in the end credits. So again, lack of tension here. And as I mentioned before, this is when the film loses itself, because Starro, in the beginning when we see him for the first time, is quite very good CGI. He's got that big star and, you know, multicolours, and his tentacles very close to what we saw from the original source material. As we all know, Starro was the first villain of the Justice Society of America. But when he was in movement, that's when the CGI really bothered me, because it just didn't flow right. It was too jelly-like, it was too plasticine-like, and it just really looked a bit wonky overall in terms of his overall movement. Now, people could say, well, it's a difficult construct to put on screen, this big starfish moving around in a big city overall, but I just didn't like it. It just felt a bit wonky, and it really took the menace away, even though he was taking on all of the faces of the people and then getting them to control them. Again, a lot of it is played for laughs, not really vivid in any way at all. And the film really loses itself in terms of its overall logic. And I'm not talking realism here, I'm just talking logic, because we have multiple scenes again, as I mentioned before, where Harley Quinn is leaping over buildings. There's this one part when she just jumps from a car onto a ledge just nonchalantly, and she wouldn't be able to do that because, remember, Harley doesn't have any superpowers. They made this real attention, or they drew attention to the fact that she had this javelin from one of the characters that died early on in the film. I don't know what was special about the javelin. It wasn't that important, but again, they've got to give Harley Quinn some sort of weaponry or special ability, if you like, in order to be involved in the final battle. And we see her running on the rooftops, and she has this moment like what we saw in Thor Ragnarok, if you remember, when the Hulk was jumping straight into Surtur. That's what we saw here, where essentially the rats is commanded by Ratcatcher, and they're all jumping over Starro. But again, that was a ridiculous moment as well. But Harley Quinn's got to jump forward straight into the eye. Surely she should have died, but she's all okay. And we see her watching the rats infiltrate Starro. And again, too much pandering to Harley Quinn. Nothing wrong with her being involved, but essentially making her, if not like superpowers, but basically like an Amazonian, where she could fight everybody, kill everybody, jump over all of these ledges, and she's got to strike one of the decisive blows in killing Starro as well. So just again, just a bit just implausible and logical, I think, in terms of the overall story and characters' abilities. And really, that's it really in terms of the overall spoilers review. So at the end of the film, we basically see the last surviving members. It's Deadshot and Ratcatcher and Harley Quinn. There's no hint as to whether there'll be a third film. And again, that will really be dependent on how well this film performs in the overall box office and the amount of numbers that it gets on the HBO Max streaming platform. Again, we saw Polka Dot die, which I think was a shocking moment when Starro crushes him as he says, "I'm a superhero." Again, overall, not too much of a shame. So will we see Ratcatcher appear? I'm not sure. I think at best, if we do get another Harley Quinn film, maybe we'll see Ratcatcher appear in that shot. Will we see the return of Bloodshot? I'm not sure. Again, they changed that character because they wanted to leave it open just in case Will Smith's character does come back in the DCU continuity. I don't think we'll see both Will Smith and Deadshot together on screen because they're just too similar in terms of the overall character, so you won't get much in terms of contrast. And as I mentioned in my non-spoiler review, we do get 2 end credit scenes. One scene is when Weasel kind of comes away where we thought he was dead but he's alive, didn't matter. And then the second scene is when we see that Peacemaker has survived from his getting shot. And we knew that because, as I mentioned before, they've got plans to have a Peacemaker series. I'm not really interested. I'm not really know why they decided to take on that character, but I think this is again just the DCU trying to expand a lot more with the lesser known names. So of course we're getting a Batgirl project on HBO Max, we're getting a Latino Blue Beetle on HBO Max, so I think this is the next stage of having a lesser known name on HBO Max. So this is not necessarily expanding the universe as such, but I think this is more expanding content for the HBO Max because they need it really in terms of new content, and obviously they know that the superhero genre is the key ticket at the moment in terms of entertainment. So I think that's what this is. So again, no real hint in terms of the overall bigger picture of the DCU, no references to Superman, Batman, Wonder Woman, Shazam or Aquaman. Very much a standalone film overall. But yeah, again, I think that's my overall thoughts in terms of the Suicide Squad and my spoiler review. Again, felt really indifferent in terms of the overall violence and the tone, but not a stellar entry within the DCU. Well, not that there were any stellar entries within the DCU, but I just thought it was decent, average, very eye-popping, very unique, but overall very derivative, very one note, one tone overall. And again, if I am going to come back to this movie, it's probably something I will have quietly in the background while I'm doing other things overall. So those are my overall spoiler revisions and thoughts on the Suicide Squad. Longer than what I thought as usual, but let me know what you think in the comments below. What were the best elements in terms of a spoiler-rific point of view in terms of this movie? Let me know what you think in the comments below. Please also hit and like the subscription and notification buttons so I can provide you with more high quality content in the future. But that's it for now. Take care of yourselves, stay safe distances, and I will see you very, very soon.